All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. For today's show, I was joined by J.R. Sweet. J.R. is actually a survivor of the CIA's trauma-based mind control program, MKUltra. Uh, he was raised into Project Monarch and a elite bloodline family out of the Mormon church, and really I gave JR the platform to tell his story, share his experiences. This episode is not so much about the large scale implications of MK Ultra or looking at some of the collective programs going on, but more so this is what JR experienced as an individual. And based on what we learn about individual experiences, I think we can paint a picture for the large scale type of operations that take place here in the United States specifically. This is just one glimpse into the reality. And JR, I find courageous, inspiring. I left this episode with a sense of empowerment for him willing to speak the truth, for him willing to share his story, and ultimately not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And I want to give a little bit of a trigger warning in a sense that there is some heavy, heavy content in this. In particular, if you yourself are suspect you may be a victim of MK Ultra or split personality, um, or have unconscious abuse that is underneath the surface, this episode may trigger um, certain feelings, emotions. So just keep that in mind as you're coming in. And if you don't feel like the timing is right on this episode, I encourage you to come back when you feel called to do so. But I appreciate JR for coming on and sharing his story. And, this won't be the last time that he comes on for a chat because there is so much that we can uncover and continue to explore here. Feels like we're really just getting going and we went for 2 hours. So just goes to show you the level of depth um, and I think authentic power that he is embodying and walking through life with. So if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on, the podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. Do appreciate you guys subscribing. You can also subscribe on Substack, mcdermott.substack.com, mcdermott.substack.com. And you can also book a one-on-one tarot reading with me if you feel called to do so. Link for all of these are in the episode show notes below. And special thank you to our one and only official sponsor, Tranquil Desires here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. And let's give a little warm welcome to Miss Aurora here. Say hello. You say hello? You're into the microphone. Yeah? Yeah? No? She did join us on this episode. She was in my lap most of it. Came up and said hello to JR at one point. Aurora is a troublemaker. She is a menace. She is causing me all sorts of cuts and bruises all over my face, my hands, my feet, and she is tormenting Luna. Ow. See, as you can demonstrated. But yeah, she's wonderful. Wonderful. Turning my house into a war zone with a kitten. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the podcast with J.R. Sweet. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I am joined by J.R. Sweet. And JR, I'm really grateful that you coming on the show and here to share your experiences. And, we'll jump into your story just to kind of give a little backdrop. JR is a survivor of the CIA's trauma-based mind control program, MKUltra, and Project Monarch. If anybody has been a regular listener of the show, we talked about it here and there. I've had Kathy O'Brien on the show before, and she shared her experiences. But for a lot of listeners, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of new information, and maybe the first time being exposed to this type of information on what's going on. So, JR, I'm grateful that you're here, and it's truly a pleasure to be able to connect, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Evan. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak out. So,
Absolutely. And, JR, I'd love to just kind of start by um, I want this to be a platform where you can come on and share your story and your experiences. And we were kind of just talking about that before we hopped on. How do you generally go about uh, when somebody asks about your story, what's your way of sort of introducing it and prefacing this type of information? Because, like I was saying, there might be a few listeners who, maybe they hear about MK Ultra, or maybe they've heard about Project Monarch, but they don't really have an in-depth understanding on what it is. How do you go about sharing, an introduction to your own story and what it was that you've gone through to kind of put it into context for listeners and maybe listeners who haven't uh, done really a deep dive into a subject like this?
Yeah, yeah, that's a difficult question, Evan. It's a really difficult and very complicated situation. I I used to be a lot more vocal in my world around me as far as talking to people at work, mostly at work in my community, and that can be very difficult because not everyone, first of all, is very receptive to that information. People have to be ready to hear it, first of all, and a lot of folks aren't ready to hear it. And it's difficult to explain. I I come from a Mormon family. It's a satanic, incestual, generationally incestual satanic family bloodline. That's also connected to the Central Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon, and the White House. And there's a lot there. We had a relationship with the church where we were involved with people in the hierarchy of the church because of what my family is and what they're involved with. And so I come from a satanic family that's hiding in the Mormon church. I say that there's a lot of Satanists in the Mormon church that are hiding there. And it can be confusing and it can be difficult to understand. But there are families in there they're using it as a cover. And my family uses that church as a cover. It provides them with the ability to look like a wonderful, wholesome, happy family when that is not the case. There's a very dark family secret there. And it is all very complicated because in the church, we were involved with, I call it a satanic network. My family's involved with the satanic network in the church. And we would be involved with things like the blood atonement. I don't know if you've heard much about that, but the satanic Mormons, they're into getting rid of people who speak out against them or their network, and there's a process to it.
Hmm.
And the CIA, they're aware of that, and they use people from the church for their trauma-based mind control program. So the church, through its genealogy work, is able to locate satanic bloodline families. So my family, the bloodlines are a big deal, the satanic bloodlines. My bloodline reaches back, I know, to King Henry VIII. I'm a descendant of King Henry VIII, and so I carry his blood in my veins. And the church is aware of that, and they look for these things, and the church actively works at protecting those satanic family bloodlines that are hiding in their church. And the CIA, not everyone who's involved in satanic ritual abuse and in the satanic the network is involved with the CIA, like I was. They don't select just anybody. So I was selected when I was 5 from my family for the CIA's trauma-based mind control program by a man named Alex Houston. That was when I was 5 years old. And Alex, he came out to my grandparents' house and they did a test on me and my siblings, my brothers and my sister. And my older brother and my older sister, they didn't pass the test. My younger brother and I did. We passed the test for what's called dissociation. I'm sure you've heard of this.
Mhm.
And so satanic incestual families that are involved with abusing their children. So I was abused from the time that I was born, as far back as I can remember, Evan. I was sexually abused and I was made to be involved in horrible, horrible, traumatic things. And by my family sexually abusing me, my key abusers were individuals such as my father, my grandfather, my uncle. And as I got older, it became political individuals such as Senator Robert Byrd, people in the music industry, for example, Charlie Pride, Doc Watson. And so when you're abused from the time that you're born, and when your family has a history of it for generations, it creates a strong sense of disassociation in that individual. And so they really liked getting me because my family has a long history of dissociation, and disassociation was very strong. I can remember even when I was older, a time when I disassociated, and I didn't intend to, and no one had intended to trigger me to dissociate. And it was the most horrid feeling, just the feeling of a complete loss of control. I was at my grandmother's house. We were at some kind of family get together, and my grandfather had passed away, and my grandmother had married someone else, and my wife and I had a child. We had a daughter who was very young at that time. And this man, he was holding my daughter and he started to tickle her. He pulled up her shirt and he started to tickle her stomach. And it was very uncomfortable. But what it did was it caused me to dissociate. I just went blank and I just stood there. It was horrible. I was like, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? My grandmother actually stepped in and said, we won't have any more of that in the family. That's not going to be happening. And she took my daughter away from this man. His name was Reed. And she took my daughter away. And then I came back. After that, I was really disappointed in myself. I was like, what on earth happened to me? What happened even? How could I just go blank like that? It was a horrid, horrid feeling. And so I have that problem of disassociation. With dissociation, they've learned you can build multiple personalities. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what the CIA is doing, and even the satanic elite and the satanic networks. This is nothing new, trauma-based mind control. It's been going on for a long time, but the CIA has been scientifically formulating it. They've really been working at making it a scientific process, at getting it down. And what they do, Evan, is they take a child such as I was, and we come from these satanic abusive families, and then you're tested to see if you can be in the program. If you disassociate strongly, you are put in the program. My little brother and I were put in the program. And then you're put through government-sponsored trauma-based mind control programming. You could also call it human bioprogramming. And we're put through that at different facilities, sometimes governmental, sometimes corporate. I can remember being on military installations, military bases, and being put through programming. I can remember being taken to just government facilities by my mother and being dropped off there and being put through programming. And also a lot of programming that I've remembered occurred at the Disneyland trauma-based mind control facility there at Disneyland. these things are oftentimes hidden in plain sight, and people don't even know. You've got churches that are involved with it. It's happening in church buildings. You've got military installations where you will have the base is a normal base, and there's normal people, normal personnel on that installation. But then you also have the top secret trauma-based mind control facilities that are located there where these things are happening. And it's all just, they try to hide it right there in front of you in plain sight. And so Disneyland is a huge trauma-based mind control programming facility. When I was selected by Alex Houston when I was 5, I stayed with my grandparents. My siblings and we stayed with my grandparents for a week because my parents were both sent down to California, to Anaheim, to the Disneyland facility, because they were positive that at least one of their children would be selected for the program. And my grandfather was highly involved in the program. I believe that he even was involved with it from its earliest conceptions, because he would talk to me about things. And so they're taking these children from these satanic families. Now, what I'm talking about are bloodliners. There's also people who aren't bloodliners. There's people who are pulled into the project for different uses and different purposes. It's a very broad range of individuals being used. You have people being used in sports. You have people being used in politics. You have people being used in Hollywood and television and the music industry who are mind slaves. People like Garth Brooks, for example, Billy Joel, Randy Travis, Senator Robert Byrd was involved with it. But he was a key player. I don't think he was a trauma-based mind slave. And then Charlie Pride, and we will be used, sometimes we'll be handled, and sometimes we'll be used as handlers at the same time. And so they're taking these children and they'll test us. And those that pass that test of dissociation, then you're put into the program and you go through government-sponsored trauma-based mind control programming. And that includes things like being made to be involved in pornography. I was used extensively in child pornography when I was younger. I have a lot of memories of that, and being made to make pornography in various places, including in Disneyland, as well as I had a girlfriend in high school, and she was Mormon, and they were involved in the project. And so they would put us together. So I've heard of people not doing that, of people being isolated from other mind slaves, but I was oftentimes placed with other mind slaves. And so one of my girlfriends, she was a mind slave, and we'd be made to make pornography together by her family and my family, as well as the Fed, the CIA. And so they'll use us for pornography, and they make a lot of money on that. It's to traumatize you and to work on your programming, but it's also to traumatize you. That's part of the programming, is the trauma. And so they will use that. We're also used as things like message couriers. And so I was made to carry messages for Senator Byrd. And then they would also use you. In my family, our family was known for getting rid of people, for the CIA, for the Pentagon, and for the White House. And so you'd consider it to be a sleeper assassin. And so I was used extensively as a sleeper assassin. I was made to kill a lot of people in my lifetime. And those are the kinds of things that they're programming you for. And each family's different. Like I said earlier, some of us are used for Hollywood, some of us are used for music. And my family, we were used a lot in porn and for killing people. And so it's really terrible stuff. But
Yeah.
and then when I got older, they cleared me for Pentagon level operations. Well, first let me let me backtrack just a little. I would like to digress. So I was, my programming was sponsored by the CIA through Senator Byrd after I was selected when I was 5. And then I was sold by my parents as a trauma-based mind slave to Byrd at the age of 15. Back in 1993, I was sold to Byrd. I remember him buying me. I remember my parents had to think about it, had to consider their options. This is a
Mhm.
sale of their son. And they had the option to sell me and my younger brother. And they chose just to sell me to the CIA for use. My younger brother, he didn't get sold. And so they, there's things, it's a black market in human trafficking, which is occurring through the federal government and the CIA. And it's an
Mm.
awful thing. Yeah.
Mm.
So I was selected and sold to Byrd for use in the CIA. And then Byrd used me for various things. Right after I'd been sold, he used me in a porno video I can remember in Memphis, Tennessee, and he made money on it. He made like 50 grand in just a couple days on that video. And that was back in 1993. And the way I would like to explain a little bit, Evan, of how it works, because when you're sold to the agency, you there has to be a transaction. There's a transaction that occurs. And so my father, because of that transaction, was awarded a large contract through the local school district because he owned a computer store.
Mhm.
He was awarded a large contract with the local school district for providing them with computers and systems in order for the school to function. And so that is how he got paid. And at that time, we had a lot of money in the family. My father went out and he bought lots of firearms. He bought lots of hot rods. Um, there was 4 or 5 of them. One of them was an old, I want to say it was a 1924 Ford, little hot rod pickup. And he'd let me drive that one, but there were a bunch of other ones. And so, and then a hot tub, house remodel, all of a sudden a bunch of money comes into the family.
Mm.
And so that's how those transactions are paid for, is through taxpayer money. They're they're smart and they are using taxpayer money to to pay for that transaction. And so Byrd, he bought me back in 93, and then they used me for various things. And then when I was, what was it? It was 1995, I want to say, and I was cleared for Pentagon level black operations. And so there's different levels in the project. You can be a CIA trauma-based mind slave who's a bloodliner, and they'll use you, but then there's a different level to that, which is you're involved with Pentagon level black operations.
Mm.
And I passed that test. That was Dick Cheney who did that test on me, Evan. Um, and that was in Nampa at a place called the Monkey Bar, where I was made to murder a girl from the community there, the Mormon community, and from my school.
Mm.
I was made to kill her, and that was awful.
Mm.
And then after that, Um, I was used for some high level assassinations. One of them was in Japan. We took out a guy. His name was Masaru Takumi. He was the second in charge of the Yamaguchi Gumi Yakuza over there in Japan. And he was murdered, and we were involved with that murder. Now, with that said, Evan, there's a lot of mind bending that goes on there. I don't know if I was made to murder Masaru or if I was made to murder this other guy who was a dentist in order to to basically wreak havoc among the Yakuza because there were a lot of consequences to the murder of that dentist. And I can remember my uncle later bringing it up and telling me that I had actually killed the dentist.
Mm,
And so there's a lot of mind bending that goes on, but I'm not sure. I
right.
I am just not sure who I was shot on that day. It was Masaru or this other guy. And so they'll use you for things like that.
Mm,
Yeah,
right.
does that make sense, Evan?
Yeah, it does. What is and what has been sort of the process for you of like the remembering process almost like awakening to this reality? Because with the split personality, like you were talking about, right? A lot of this becomes almost unconscious, right, in your waking mind, and it's something that, as a trauma response, when we disassociate, like we store it in the unconscious mind and we don't consciously remember. What was it for you that sort of triggered this awakening in realization that this is what your life has been, and it's in kind of having almost like a dual personality in a lot of ways? Like what was that process like for you?
It is a dual personality. I have a multiple personality disorder. A lot of people like to call it these days dissociative identity disorder. And that's great. They can call it whatever they want. But I would call it a multiple personality disorder because that more clearly defines it.
Mhm.
Because what they'll do in the project is they will cause you to disassociate, and then they will build these multiple personalities in your mind while you're dissociated. And so I've had to work through many different personalities, and I'm not done yet. I still have a lot of personalities and memories I need to still work through. But that process was extremely painful and terrifying.
Mhm.
It's not a fun thing to go through. You think you're losing your mind. It started for me back, I would say, late 2016, early 2017. And things just started to break down. I had been separated from my abuse base. I was living in Moscow, Idaho, and I had attended the University of Idaho in Moscow, my wife and I. And we had graduated, and I had started my own construction company there in Moscow and just worked for myself. And I was away from my abuse base, which was located more down in the Boise Valley. And so there'd be lots of little weird things that would happen, which they would do to me in order to try to bring me back and make sure that I wasn't leaving the network or starting to remember or becoming a threat to them. For example, I had a pair of sunglasses that I had gotten on one operation in Los Angeles. It was a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses. And my grandmother, after that operation, she kept them in a kitchen drawer. And I found those sunglasses in Moscow when I hopped over the fence one day to go grab a beer at the gas station because I lived in family housing and we were close to the gas station. So I went outside, I jumped over the fence, and right there in front of me was a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses. And I was like, oh, sweet, these look nice. But they were a subconscious reminder for me from them. I would get phone calls for an individual whose name was James all the time. Well, one of my personalities was named James. And so I'd get these calls all the time. Or one time, my cousin, he came up to Moscow from the Boise area because he just wanted to see me, is what he told me. And so we went to lunch that day, and he told me the Russians had hacked my email account. I don't think I've talked to anyone about that. My wife and I were just talking about that
Mm,
and how weird it was. How would he know that my email account had been hacked by the Russians? And so my email account had been hacked by the Russians, and he came up to tell me, and and that was a weird experience. It was like, okay,
mm,
like, yeah. But at that time, I'd been away from my abuse base, And another thing which Kathy has talked about, Evan, that helps to break down human bioprogramming, trauma-based mind control programming. We were fed a ton of drugs in the project. I can remember being fed drugs from the time I was a child by the CIA, and they would use drugs in my programming as well as when I was operational. They would call them potions when they would give them to me, and it was all about black magic. And there's one drug you're not allowed to have, and that's marijuana. Trauma-based mind slaves aren't supposed to have marijuana. Well, I had been smoking marijuana when I was in Moscow. You know, I'm not trying to keep any secrets. Like, yeah, I
Mm.
did. I smoked some marijuana. We lived right next to Pullman, Washington, and it was very easy to get that. And so I would smoke marijuana, and it always made me feel more level. I I would feel very disjointed in my mind, and marijuana would help bring me back to a center point. And I
Mm.
didn't understand what was happening until later after I started to wake up and realize what had happened in my life. And so marijuana, I feel like helped to start breaking my programming down. But in 2016, 2017, I started to have flashbacks, I would call them. I would get flashbacks of events and I would talk to people about them. And I didn't understand what they were. For example, sweeping with a broom. Um, I can remember sweeping with a push broom, and I had taken the broom and I was pulling with it, and my grandpa, he yelled at me and he said, "What are you doing? That's a push broom. You need to push with it, not pull." And I can remembering that incident and talking to one of my clients about it. And I laughed about it at that time because I didn't realize where it had occurred or what was going on. And one of the things that sparked, I would say, part of my subconscious conscious mind union was my client said, "Well, your grandpa sounds like an asshole." And
Mm.
for me at that time, my grandpa, he was my hero. He was, so when you're abused like that, you tend to perceive your abusers as the most wonderful people in the world. There's a name for it, Stockholm syndrome, I want to say,
Mhm.
where you will perceive that that abuser is loving and caring. And I always thought my grandfather was very loving and caring, and the bad stuff was always pushed at the back of my mind in my subconscious, and I couldn't remember.
Mm.
And so that really sparked something in my brain. Because I was like, well, grandpa was an asshole. No one had ever, well, I take that back. My younger brother had said such things when we were younger. And I always wondered why he said those things. But now they make sense to me. And so at that time, I started to go through a period where I felt like something was eating at me. I felt like something was wrong. Me and my wife were having trouble in our marriage. I was getting hard to live with. I was sporadic. I was emotional. I was not logical. I would go through periods of outburst where I would say things I didn't mean. I would just act erratic and angry. And one day, my wife, she said to me, she said, "What is wrong with you? What what is wrong with you?" And that was a catalytic moment for me because I'd never thought about it my
Mm.
whole life. Like, what is wrong with me? I went out into the woods and I was cutting firewood that day. And I just thought all day, what is wrong with me? What is going on? And that was a catalyst. You have to start asking questions about your life and who you are and how you act with an open mind and the ability to listen to yourself. And so that opened a door for me. After that, my wife and I talked about various things, but one of the things we talked about was my trouble with memory. And so my wife has told me that I always had trouble with my memory, and I couldn't tell her about things such as going to Disneyland with my family or various things. And when I began to realize I had holes in my memory, it became concerning because they
Mm.
were important events. For example, meeting an individual in the country music industry named Charlie Pride. Charlie Pride, I met him back in 1993 with my grandparents and my younger cousin. My younger cousin was also in the project. And my grandparents took us back east. This was the summer when I was sold. This was right after I was sold to the Central Intelligence Agency and to Byrd. We went over to the back east to Nashville, Branson, various places, and we met Charlie Pride. And I had a picture of Charlie Pride. I still have it, and it's signed by
Mm.
Charlie Pride. It's signed to Johnny from Charlie. And when these things came up with my wife back in early 2017, I I was going through our stuff in our house. My wife and I had just built a house in Idaho. We built a house out on 12 acres out there. Beautiful property, nice home, and we were going through our stuff because I was thinking about doing a yard sale. We were a little short on money at that time. We were working on finishing our house, and we were like, well, let's do a yard sale. And I said to my wife, I said, well, sweetie, it's too bad Charlie never signed that picture he gave me. Maybe it would be worth something now. And my wife, she looked at me and she said, no, he did sign it. What do you mean? He signed it. He wrote right on it. And she said, but it wouldn't be worth anything because Charlie wasn't that great of a musician. And I didn't know much about that, you know.
Mm.
And and I I was blown away. I was like, what do you mean he signed it? And so I went up into the attic and I got it out. And because I couldn't remember meeting him. What I could remember, Evan, was going to the concert, sitting through the concert, and then at the end of the concert, Charlie was backstage and he wasn't signing autographs. And everyone was very disappointed in the crowd because at the end of the show, Charlie was supposed to be there with the other musicians and he was supposed to sign autographs because you could buy this picture when you went to the show. They would sell you this picture. It was like 20 bucks. And then after the show, they would autograph it. And so I could remember having a couple other members of the band autograph it and sign it. And their autographs are on the picture. But as far as I could remember, Charlie was backstage and he wasn't signing anything. But when I found the picture, there it was, loud and clear. Charlie had signed it. And it was like, oh my God, what, what happened?
Mm.
Why can't I remember this? It just freaked me out. And I started to realize that something was wrong, that because my wife and I's marriage was straining and I had holes in my memory, and I had this feeling that something else was wrong, that I had somehow been involved with some kind of government program. And I just thought that was crazy. And so I went and I saw a therapist. And so when you start to remember these things, you're wondering what the heck is going on. But for me, Evan, I just wanted the truth.
Mm.
That's what I started searching for, and that's what I'm still searching for in my own past. I want all of the truth. I just want it because we should know. We should know our own past and our own truth and what we lived through because it affects your life. It was affecting my life tremendously. And so I went and I saw this therapist and I wanted to work through these issues. And I also wanted to quit smoking because I've had trouble with smoking for a lot of my life. And
Mm.
my grandfather, he used to smoke a lot and he used to make me smoke. I can remember smoking back when I was, I don't even know, 5, 6 years old. My grandfather would make me smoke. And so I went to see this therapist. Now, she was a hypnotherapist, this wonderful older lady there in Moscow, Idaho, a real sweet gal. And so I set up a time to go meet with her and to start working through these things. And I went in, we sat down, I met her, and and it was weird. You know, the CIA, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to let them know how much they screw up because
Hmm.
they're really not that good at what they do. They're very lazy, they're drug addicts, they're sick pedophiles, and they have a process that they follow, but they are lazy and they're not that smart. And so Kathy has a good way of describing it that they're linear thinkers.
Mm.
And I would agree with that. They are very linear thinkers. And so they make mistakes in what they do. So I went into therapy, and when I sat down, the phone started to ring, and it rang once. And this was a landline, not a cell phone. And so the landline goes off, and it rings once. And my therapist, she's like, oh, the phone's ringing. And then it quits. And I'm sitting there, and then it rings again. And it rings two times and then it quits. They were trying to trigger me through the phone. And so I'm sitting there and I'm going through all kinds of things in my head, trying to understand what I'm even dealing with because I hadn't remembered hardly anything at that point. And so they were trying to trigger me through the phone as well as just straight up harass my physical or my therapist. And so she took me into hypnosis, and I talked to her. I told her what was going on. I was having trouble. I feel like there's holes in my memory, and I tried to have her walk me through the memory with Charlie Pride because I really wanted to know what happened there. And I had thought, Evan, you know, you hear people talk about hypnosis and you see it in the movies and all this other bullshit.
Hmm.
And I had imagined that when she put me in hypnosis and she started to walk me through this memory, it was just gonna bam come back. And I was gonna be able to remember what happened. Well, that's not what happened. It did not bam come back. It actually took a very long time. The memory of Charlie Pride is one of the memories that took me a very long time to work through. When I first started to work through it and remember it, it was I remembered somebody jumping out. I remembered being taken backstage, and I remembered somebody jumping out and scaring us. And they were wearing an animal suit with this like bull head on or something, and blood. And it was all very confusing because your subconscious and conscious mind are trying to join, and your subconscious is trying to communicate what happened to you. And Charlie Pride was a monster. He was a horrible man, and he horribly abused my cousin and I. He raped us backstage, and he stuck a knife in me because I'd been programmed with a message for him. One of the reasons we were there to see Charlie was because he was supposed to test our voices. He's in the music industry. Bird, as well as my grandfather, wanted me to be involved in the music industry because my grandfather had been used in the music industry,
Hmm.
and they wanted me to follow in his footsteps. And a lot of my life was based on and my programming on a country song. And so, for example, I was made to kill a man in Reno just to watch him die. That was in 1993 on my 15th birthday at about 11:30, 11:45, right before it turned over to the next day. I was made to kill a man in Reno just to watch him die. He was this homeless guy, and that was awful. That was
Hmm.
not, yeah, that was an awful deal.
Hmm. Wow.
And so, you have any questions at this point, Evan?
No, I'm soaking it all in, and it's you know, the it to hear the process of even just beginning to remember. I can see that. I mean, 2017, that's 8 years ago. So I mean, I'm assuming the last 8 years, it's almost a continuous going through, looking back, seeing, feeling, remembering, and it's kind of an on. Would you say this is like almost a lifelong process that you're going to embark upon to remember
Yeah.
everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a lifelong process. People talk about healing, and I
Mm,
have healed enough to where I can function in society better. And I have a lot better relationship with my wife, with my children, even with my pets.
mm,
Something Kathy talks about is people who are abusive will abuse their animals. And I used to be hard on my dog, for example. I pretty much hated dogs before I started to remember my past.
mm.
And and now I understand why. They would use dogs with you to make porn. They would use dogs for your programming. And so, but that wasn't the dog's fault. And so I love my dog now, and I've been able to have a lot better relationship with my pets as
Mm.
well. And so the healing process itself is lifelong. You make you make strides, you work through things, you learn about yourself. But I don't think in my lifetime, even Evan, that I can work through all the things I need to work through. It's just too much.
Mm.
And it's awful. You sometimes I've taken a break from it. I'm working again on my memories, but I took quite a while off
Yeah.
just to take a break from it. And and that was good, but I need to start working on it more and more and make a good habit of
Mm.
it. And
I.
so when I started seeing that therapist and she had walked me through that memory, I realized that that was a bad idea, Evan, that I should not be put in hypnosis and I should not allow my therapist to walk me through my memories. I didn't want her to unintentionally plant anything there or say anything because you're dealing with the subconscious mind. And so I told her after that, I said, you can take me into hypnosis, but the only thing I want you to tell me is that I'm safe to remember. And I need to remember to be safe because I understood that I was in danger, that there
Mm.
was an actual threat that started to become clear. My family was very dishonest with me. There's a story my grandfather told in the family about a movie producer after the war. And my grandfather told me this when I was a kid, and he told my younger brother and he told my cousin one day. We were out at his house, and he told us this story about meeting a movie producer out on the streets of LA at 2 in the morning. And he said he'd been working. He went out to the street corner to catch the bus, and the limo pulled up, and the window rolled down, and the man in the limo my grandfather recognized instantly. And the man in the limo said, "Get in, young man. I want to talk to you." And so my grandpa, he got in the limo and they started to drive around. And this man told my grandfather about all of the people that he had made famous in the movie industry, all the people that he'd elevated. And he told my grandfather that he really liked the way my grandfather looked. My grandfather was a handsome young man. He was a Marine. He was back from the war. And this man wanted him to essentially be his male boy toy. And for doing that, he was going to use him in his films and elevate him in the music or the movie industry, the film industry.
Mm.
And my grandpa, the story goes that he told this movie producer, "No way, I want you to drop me back off right where you picked me up." And my grandpa told us he just wanted to kill this guy and he wanted out of that car as soon as possible. Well, I don't believe that. There was something going on there. There was some kind of deal, some kind of arrangement. And that story had circulated through my family some. Not all of my family knows about that story. My sister, for example, when I started to remember these things and I was trying to talk to my siblings about it, my sister was like, "What are you talking about? That's crazy. Like, what happened?" Well, my grandpa, at the end of the story, we said, "Well, who was the movie producer, Grandpa? Who was that?" And my grandpa told us, he said, "You can't know. If you ever knew who that movie producer was, it would shatter your reality." And so this was a question that I'd carried for much of my life.
Mm.
When I was going to college at the University of Idaho, my wife and I had gone down to visit my parents down there in the Boise Valley, and we were talking to my father. And at that time, I hadn't started to remember any of this stuff. And I asked my dad just kind of nonchalantly because my grandfather had passed away, and I didn't think it'd be a very big deal. I said, "Dad, who was the movie producer from Grandpa's story?" And my dad got really mad and really defensive. And he said, "I'm not telling you that. I promised I would never." No, 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 Evan. He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm not telling you that."
Mm.
And he refused to tell me. And he got mad and he walked away. And then I wondered what the hell that was all about. It was just confusing. And
Mm.
so later, when I was first starting to wake up and remember these things, I texted my dad because I wanted to test my family because I felt like something was wrong with my dad. And so I texted him and I said, "Can I ask you something?" And he said, "Sure, you can ask me anything, son." And I said, "Who was the movie producer?" And my dad told me, "I don't remember. I don't know who the movie producer was. I can't remember that." And I knew he was lying to
Mm.
me. I said, "You're lying. You do know who it is. You told me you knew back when I asked you a couple years ago." When that happened, Evan, I knew my dad was lying to me. And it blew me away. It was like, why? I asked my dad in that text conversation, why? Why are you lying? Who are you covering for? And I asked him, is there still a threat going on? And so you're very confused when you start to remember all these things. You ask me what it feels like. It's confusing. And then you have on top of that your wife and your children, and you're supposed to be this normal individual. My wife thought I was losing my mind when I would start talking about these things. So my therapist, she would take me under hypnosis and she would ask me, or she would tell me that I was safe to remember and I needed to remember to be safe. I would come out of hypnosis and then I would talk to her about what I had remembered since our time before. And a lot of those memories carried scars.
Mm.
There were scars associated with them. It wasn't like you just remembered something and and that was it. You'd remember it and there'd be a scar associated with that. And so my one of the big scars I can remember was, well, at this time, around this time, Evan, I felt like I had been involved with some kind of government program. And so I was like, what government program would they have which would involve your memory having holes in it? And what I found was Kathy O'Brien's story
Mm.
about about her story. And and that freaked me out a little bit. I was like, wow, that's really weird. Like, what is that about? And so I bought her book, and my wife and I both started reading it. My wife, she's a faster reader than I am. She's a lot faster. And so
Mm.
she went through it a lot quicker. And I can remember one day her saying, like, wow, Kathy talks about Charlie Pride. This is really weird. Like, how can you know Charlie Pride too and have this experience that's a huge hole in your memory? And Kathy talked about him. But the biggest one for me was when somebody stuck a knife in her chest. I forget who it was. I try not to read other people's work anymore because I don't want it to interfere with my own
Mm.
path. And so Kathy, though, she talked about someone sticking a knife in her chest and making her memorize a message for somebody. The first night I read that, Devin, it didn't mean anything to me. So as a trauma-based mind slave, people need to be vigilant because the first time I read that passage, It just went in and it's settled. Well, the next night I sat down again with the book and I was going to go to bed, but I liked to read before I went to bed. And so I was reading Kathy's book and I didn't know where I'd left off. I was like, where did I leave off in the book? And so I just started over on that page. And that page covered having a knife stuck in her chest. And when I read that page that night, it hit me just like a ton of bricks. Wham. And holy cow, I opened my shirt and I looked at it. And right there on the center of my chest was the scar that my uncle had given me when he had programmed me with the message for Charlie Pride and Senator Byrd.
Mm.
And they had programmed me with that. And then later I would remember another individual whose name I believe is Kyle, who was involved with that programming as well. And they had taken a knife and they had stuck it in my chest. It was a switchblade. And I'd even been given a switchblade at that time. My uncle, when he had stuck that knife in my chest, he gave me a switchblade and he said, "This is a gift from Byrd," because I'd just been sold to Byrd and I was carrying a message to him. And that blew me away. I was like, holy shit, how can I have this scar? It just scares the hell out of you. You
Mm.
don't even know what to think. Because you have holes in your memory, you don't feel right. You're a multiple. You don't even know you're a multiple. And you're finding scars. And so I would find scars associated with the traumas that I had endured. And I would tell my therapist about it and I would show her the scars. And so I have scars on my wrist, both of them where Byrd had tortured me and branded me as one of his slaves. My head got crushed in when I was in the mountain on a that was after I'd been selected for Pentagon level Black Ops and I was doing guard duty over a satanic ritual, cannibalistic satanic ritual by this really, really old cultic group. I don't know who they were. It seems like they were Asian of some kind, but I don't know what cult this was. But it was a horrible experience. It was so bad that we were all trauma-based mind slaves that were guarding this facility and this ceremony. And one of the mind slaves, his programming started to break down. This stuff isn't
Mm.
perfect. People may imagine that trauma-based mind slavery is perfect and flawless. It's not. This guy started to break down and he became a threat actually to the ceremony. So an
Mm.
individual who was supposed to be guarding this ceremony became the threat. And I was closest to him, and so I had to move to him first. Well, he ended up smashing my head in with his submachine gun. I think I was too close for him to shoot me even, and so he just crushed my head in. And I didn't have any ammo. I was so young. I was so young. The CO was really pissed that my uncle even took me to be involved in the guard detail because I was like 17 years old. I
Mm.
was young, and so he didn't want to give me any ammo. So all I could do was stall him. And once he realized that he was being stalled, he crushed my head. Well, my head is crushed in on this side. You can feel it. If you were here, I would let you feel that. And then I have scars like it's a very personal scar where my grandfather raped me once and cut me up with a knife. And that scar is that's in between my legs, in between my anus and my scrotum. I'll just say it. I have a
Mm.
huge scar there from my grandpa wanting to cut a vagina into me while he was raping me because he wished that I had been born a female. And so he was going to remove my genitalia and give me a vagina. My grandfather was insane. And, yeah, he was insane. And that was a
Mm.
horrible experience. That happened in McCall, Idaho.
Mm. Wow.
And so you'll find scars. And then on top of that, Evan, the harassments begin. And so the helicopters started coming out of nowhere. Helicopters started following me around, little black military helicopters, or even Black Hawks. I'd be out at the house and the Black Hawk could come along right over my house, right over me. Um, that I have so many. I started to record it and write it all down because it was so much. There's so much harassment from aircraft, and my wife would be harassed. And we tried to communicate with my siblings about these things, and my siblings became very defensive before I started to really talk about it. And I would just call my siblings to talk about like our life and growing up. My older brother, he told me our life sucked, and he didn't want to remember any of it because
Mm,
I was calling him going, what happened in our life? Like, because I feel like I have holes in my memory. And my brother said, our life was horrid. I don't want to remember it, Johnny. I pushed that away. I don't even want to remember. And I don't know where he's at now. I don't talk to my family much. If I talk to my family, we get harassed very heavily.
mm,
The last time I tried talking to my younger brother, one of them, um, yeah, it got pretty exciting very quickly. We had a helicopter directly over our house. This wasn't that long ago. This was maybe 8 months ago. I'm not sure. And so they will start harassing us in that manner. We'd also get phone calls. We get phone calls from various people. A lot of times they'd call, they'd hang up when you answered, or you'd answer and there'd be nothing, just nothing there. And then sometimes it would ring twice or three times and then hang up, or once, and I'll call it back, and it would be this number has been disconnected. And so you try calling it back, and no, this number's been disconnected. So you're going through all this weird stuff. And the Mormon church is involved with it, Evan, like I said earlier. And so when I started to remember all this stuff, I said on Facebook, I got on Facebook. This was towards the beginning, and I said the Mormon church, because I started to remember stuff about the church, and a man named Gordon B. Hinckley and Monson and Airing. I knew those people. I'd met with those people when I was younger.
mhm,
And I put a post up on Facebook, and I just said the church is involved with the CIA's trauma-based mind control program. And people can go to my Facebook account, and I still have the same account, and they can see those threads and see the history of before I woke up and after. And it's interesting. That's why I have my Facebook account there, not only to use it as a platform to speak out, but because it's a history. You can
mm,
you can see before and after. And when I put that post up, Evan, within 4 hours, I was going to bed. It was about 8:45 at night,
mhm,
and I was going to bed. And my wife comes and gets me out of bed, and she says, "Someone's coming down the driveway." And I got out of bed, and I was like, "Oh no, this is weird." Because we lived on 12 acres. It was 11.6 or whatever. Anyways,
yeah,
and I had a very long driveway. It was like quarter mile long. And so to see someone coming down my driveway at night out there in the middle of nowhere was a little strange. And so I got up. Um, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was up. At that time, it was even hard to sleep for me because I didn't know when they were going to come to try to kill me, because that's what I did for the CIA and for the Mormons too. We'd kill people. And so I go down to answer the door. Well, I answered the door with a handgun in my hand. I didn't let them see it, but I wasn't going to play around. People shouldn't play around with these things. They rely heavily on people trusting,
mm,
and people being naive, and people being courteous. You don't have to be courteous. You don't have to trust a damn soul. So when I went to the door, I was not courteous, and I did not trust those two young men dressed as Mormons who came to my door at 8:45 at night out in the middle of nowhere. And I opened the door a little bit and I said, "What are you doing here?" And they told me that someone had said that I had called the church and that I had requested their presence. And I said, no, I did not request you coming out here. I don't want to talk to you. And the the gentleman who was closest to the door, he was interesting because he
Mhm.
almost seemed like he knew what was going on, but the other kid behind him, he seemed like he had no idea what was going on. And so I said, no, you need to leave. You need to leave right now. And the one that was closest to me, the whole time I'm sitting there talking to them, they're looking around. They keep looking at the neighbor's house, which was off in the distance. They keep looking towards the driveway. I didn't know how many other of them were out there. And I said, no, you need to leave. And the gentleman says, well, let me give you my card. And I said, I forget what I said, Evan, but he started reaching into his coat
Mm.
and trying to get something. And he seemed to be struggling with it. And in my mind, I said, okay, this is not good. What is he trying to acquire? And I just said, no, you're leaving. And I closed the door, I set the deadbolt, and I just stood back and waited. You have to be very clear when you're dealing with trauma based mind slaves. Very clear with your orders. They are used to clear, concise orders. I said, no, you're leaving. Goodbye. Close the door, set the deadbolt, conversation's over. And it took a couple minutes. I don't know how long, maybe 2 to 5 minutes before they finally went back out to their car. And then they sat in their car for a while and then they finally left. And that was a very nerve-wracking experience. They tried to kill me several times. With that was one instance, and then there were gunmen that were sent in on other occasions, as well as they sent an old friend of mine out to my place to trigger me and my suicide programming. A
Mm.
friend of mine that I hadn't seen in 15 years all of a sudden calls me and wants to come out to see me and visit with me. And he triggered me. The next day, I had to endure and go through my suicide programming. And that was horrid. That was a horrid thing. When I first started to remember these things, one of the first things I did, Evan, was I went and bought a Glock 19, a handgun,
Mhm.
because I knew that my life was in danger and the life of my family's. In my suicide programming, my uncle had used a Glock 19 and made me put it to my head and programmed me to shoot myself with it if I ever talked and if I ever remembered about this stuff. Well, one of the first things I did when I started to remember was I went and bought a G19.
Mm.
As soon as I started to remember that stuff, I sold that G19 pretty darn quick. And I bought something else that was completely disconnected from any of my past because I'd also been made to use Colt 1911 for horrid things too. And so I tried to select something that wasn't associated with that. But that was horrid to go through that programming. And I had to take a walk and really try to clear my head because in my mind, I was dealing with you need to kill yourself, you need to kill your family, you do not need to be alive. And to hear those things going on in your head is horrid. And you wonder why. Where's it coming from? Luckily, I was healed enough. I was able to work through it. I went through those same things when I saw my therapist and I was laying there under hypnosis. I started to go through that where I wanted to, there was a voice in my head saying, get rid of her. You can't talk to her about this. She's not supposed to know this. You have to kill her. And so I had to go through that with my therapist too. In the end, Evan, my therapist was, she told me I couldn't come back and talk to her anymore. And so I saw her for about 2.5, 3 months just to come back around to that again. I'm sorry. I know I ramble and I apologize. But my therapist, after 2.5, 3 months, said, you can't come back here and you can't talk to me about these things because not only would the phone ring, but you'd have weird people out in front of her house, pacing back and forth slowly, just hanging out. One day we had a utility truck pull up, people run over to the side of the house and just start banging on it. weird things like that. And that's just when I was there, as well as the phone ringing. It got to where she would unplug the phone
Mm.
when I got there. She was like, "Oh, he's coming." And I'd come in and, "Oh, hold on, I forgot to unplug the phone."
Right.
Oh, and so she'd unplug the phone because she knew it would start ringing. And it just scared her. It scared the hell out of her. She was a sweet old Christian lady, and she told me she would keep everything that we had documented in case I ever had to go to court with it. And she said, "I'll keep all this, but I can't talk to you about these things." And she said she would hypnotize me to quit smoking cigarettes, but that was it. She said, "And then I'm done." And so I let her hypnotize me to quit smoking. I would add, it did not work
Mm.
at all. I left there and it did nothing. I was like, wow, because I'd been hypnotized years before to quit smoking and it had worked instantly. I left that hypnosis and I just walked out and I didn't touch a cigarette again for years. But this time it didn't work at all. And so I had to quit seeing her, Evan, because it freaked her out.
Mm.
And and then I just had to start working through it myself. Kathy is she has done a wonderful job. I know you've talked to her before, and I communicated with her a little bit when I first started to remember these things. I emailed her, and she's a very nice gal, and she did email me back. But I would imagine hearing from people like me, she hears from people like me all the time, and and she just pretty much wished me well.
Mm.
And 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 that's okay. I get it. But she put together some really good works. And one of those is PTSD Time to Heal. And I get a lot of people who ask me, how do I work through these things? How do I deal with this? Get Kathy's book,
Mm.
PTSD Time to Heal. It's free online, or she'll send you a copy if you're broke. She's wonderful. Or you can buy it. I just bought a copy and had it sent to me. And I've been using the process that she defines in that book. So I have done in the past. I've been taking a break from it lately, but like I said, I'm trying to get back into it again. And she defines a process of journaling where you're supposed to work through all these things through journaling. Um, and it's important to wear a watch and keep
Mm.
track of time. When I learned that, I began to discover times when I would miss time. And it's been very helpful. So I wear a watch all the time. That's one of Kathy's suggestions. And not to digress, but one of the weird things, Evan, in my family is my grandfather, when I turned 8 years old and I was baptized in the Mormon church, that was a really bad time in my life. And I haven't worked through that memory because I just haven't, there's so many of them to work through. That's not one that's been a priority. But that one, I get flashes of it. And that one was really bad. And um, somebody was killed. Um, and it was a really bad memory. But at that
Mm.
time, my grandfather, as a gift for my baptism, he bought me a watch. And he told me how important it was that I keep track of time. And so my grandfather, he was evil and he was multiple and he was involved with this, but there was a part of him that wasn't evil, that wished none of it was happening. And
Mm.
he would do things like that, like tell me to keep track of time because he knew I was vulnerable. And so it's a nightmare remembering this stuff. But Kathy has provided a very good process through her book, PTSD Time to Heal. And so for anyone out there watching this, I would highly recommend you get that book and you learn from it. It's not very long. Just read it, work through the process.
Mm.
It's a huge asset. And so I've used that book as my guiding principle. I have folders and folders. I didn't bring any here to show you, but just binders full of journaled memories. And the key to it, you're going to, if you are a trauma, if you're an individual who's trying to work through something you don't remember, just start writing. What do you remember from that incident? Just start writing it down. Some of my memories, Evan, I would remember. I can remember one. It was, why was I putting on a shoulder holster for a handgun? I could remember putting on a shoulder holster for a handgun. Why? Where was I? Who was I with? What was I doing? And you start asking those questions. And so one day you might write for an hour. Well, I remember putting on a shoulder holster. Well, where was I? Well, I can't remember. Who was I with? Well, I can't remember. The next day you come back and you read that and then you start again. And you might even write, I remember putting on a shoulder holster. And after a week of this, you might remember, oh, I had a handgun too. It was a revolver. And I was with so and so, and we were at their house. Well, then you ask, well, where were we going? And you just start to ask yourself questions all the time. And it's important that you keep working at it on that memory and you don't lose focus and you just work on it. It can be a little bit every day. Sometimes it's 15 minutes where you just sit down and you are, because there's walls of amnesia that you're trying to break through. I call them thresholds. A lot of times in your memory, you'll come to a door, and that's where you'll hit a wall where you can't remember, and you have to work through getting through that memory wall of where you were going and what was behind that door. And so it's a long process, but I would highly recommend that book to folks.
Mm.
And so it's a long process. It's extremely painful, and you have to want the truth. You can't, sometimes I'll have people, Evan, like on Twitter or something, they'll say, oh, gee, that was a great story. No, no, it wasn't. It was awful. It was horrid. And I lived through it, and I'm glad that I did, but there is nothing great about that story. It was a horrible experience. And you need to be able to face that. Once you can face it, because for people like me, you are repressing it and it's there, whether you face it or not. And you need to work through it, face it, accept the truth, because that's when you can move forward in a positive way in your own life and begin to heal. It does not help you. Like my older brother telling me he doesn't want to remember. That's not going to help him. That's not going to help anybody. It happened. Deal with it. Be a man.
Yeah.
Or a woman, whatever you are. I'm a man, so be a man. My brother's a man. Be a man. Deal with it. Face it. What happened to you? And so it's a very long process and very painful and very scary. And they start to harass you and they start to try to kill you sometimes. And you're followed around. They watch me everywhere I go. But I realize I've been watched my whole life. They've been watching me. And so it's just how it is. Well, what do
Yeah.
you do when you're a targeted individual like
Mm.
that? I don't know that there's much you can do other than just work with it.
Yeah.
Try to take all the precautions you can. My grandfather tried to share with me all of the things that help to keep you alive, even when you're just operational for the CIA. And so I've been able to use those things to my advantage, the things that my grandfather has taught
Mm.
me. Things like a good sniper never takes the same road twice. You always have to be thinking. They're watching, they get used to your patterns. Don't go to the same gas station every day. Don't go to the same grocery store every time. Don't take the same road to where you're going and back. Mix it up. Try to keep them on their toes. That helps. That helps a lot. So
Right.
I know I'm rambling. So
No,
I was
I was gonna say I always love to sit and listen and be able to hear the full perspective, so I don't view it as rambling so much.
okay.
I if anything, I think it's to be able to follow the flow of the story and all of your thoughts and see it all tied together. I think it's really eye-opening for me. And JR, do you find, I mean, I know now you say that they're still watching and monitoring, and that's going to be a lifelong thing. Do you find yourself, um, does it had, I'm sure at one point it brought a level of fear. Is that something that you still deal with? How do you, go through the day to day knowing this, knowing that, you know, in ways your life still is in danger in certain aspects? What is how do you manage that fear and in continuing to move forward with a sense of purpose in pursuit of the truth? Because I know a lot of people, you know, based on what you were talking about, whether it's fear of actually acknowledging the truth and going inward and doing the healing process, or the fear of the ramifications of doing so, what is it that drives you forward and how you manage it and approach this situation?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, Evan.
Mm.
Yeah, because we want to survive. Um, but I have to my advantage in my programming and in my life, I've
There she is.
yeah, there she is. What a sweetie.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's Aurora.
nice. Hello, Aurora. Yeah, so in my life, they have they do awful things to you. And I've talked about suicide programming. I've talked to a lot of folks about this, but they put me through a suicide programming where I was my heart was stopped and I died.
Mm.
And I went to a place that is just undescribable in its beauty and in its peace and in its calm. And I went, it's a place of light, beautiful place of light and color and just beautiful. So what happened to me, Evan, is I was used after I'd been purchased by Bird for the CIA. I was used in a presentation for Gordon B. Hinckley. So I mentioned my family was involved with the hierarchy of the church. And I was used in a presentation for Gordon B. Hinckley after he had become the president of the church. I won't call him a prophet because he's nothing but a satanic piece of human shit. But we did a presentation for him on trauma-based mind control and the CIA's program because he wanted to know about it. He had just become the president of the church and he wanted to know about it. And so we did a presentation for him. And after that presentation, they wanted to make sure that me and the other individual that were in that didn't talk. And we were put through suicide programming. I've been through a couple different sessions of suicide programming, one with my uncle when he made me hold a gun to my hand. And this other one I can remember where we were put in what are called deprivation tanks. I've been in deprivation tanks several times in my life. John C. Lilly worked on designing these tanks and creating them for the CIA and for the satanic elite, part of the human bioprogramming process. And they will use these tanks. Kathy talked about it once, I believe. Even the Army Rangers will use that in order to be programmed with what we call a mind link, so that everyone is linked in their minds that's in a specific unit so that they don't have to use comms as much. You're able to know what the other person is thinking, what their next move is. And so I've been put through that with my with my younger brother and my cousin. We were mind linked once back in 93. And then I can remember being mind linked around the year 2000 with this other individual who was a CIA mind slave. We worked together. And so they will do that. But we were put in the depth tanks for suicide programming, and they stopped my heart. And so I died at that time. They stopped my heart in this depth tank. They put a wetsuit on me. I had this wetsuit that was measured out specifically for my body, and it was covered in these pancake style copper electrode looking things. They were like flat, and then they had this electrode thing, and then the wire would plug onto the electrode, and that pancake copper would rest on your body. They had it where it would be put in specific spots, and they would run electrical current through it, Evan, and take you through a session. And so I was put in the tanks in my wetsuit. My buddy was also put in a suit and put in a depth tank, and they started to hit us with electricity. First, they told us we were going to play a game, and that game was that you weren't allowed to move at all. They said we don't. The game is you're not allowed to move. They always try to make a game of it. And so the game was you weren't allowed to move, and if you did, you'd get hit with electricity. And so they fried the living shit out of me in that game. I thought it'd be easy. I'd just lay lifeless in the solution. Well, I wouldn't say it was water. It was more like a water solution of some kind because you were buoyant in it, but you'd still sink so that you were like in the middle of it. And then they started to, so you couldn't feel anything. You're like hanging there suspended in this solution, and you can breathe because you've got a breathing apparatus, but they would hit me with electricity, and they fried the living hell out of me, Evan. They just, and it got to where it was so painful, and I became a human vegetable hanging there. And then they told me they were going to push me over the rainbow, and they were going to stop my heart. And that they told me the purpose of it. The purpose of it was so that I would kill myself if I ever remembered this stuff, and I would die. I would stop my own heart. My mind would stop my heart. And so they stopped my heart, and I died. And I floated above my body there in the tanks, and I was floating above myself. And I can remember looking down, and I was used to being shoved out of my body. When you're put through trauma like that, Evan, you are shoved out. You can be shoved out of your body. You'll hear veterans and stuff talk about it. You can read about it from people in war. For example, a mortar land next to them, and that blast will blow their spirit out of their body. It's a similar concept through trauma. And so they would traumatize me often to the point where I would leave my body and just watch it from above. But then you'd always go back into it, and you'd get through that and you'd move on with life. Well, this time wasn't like that. I was pushed out of my body, and I was hanging there in the air in spirit form because my body's down there. And this tunnel started coming, and this sound, it was so loud, like this roaring train of wind chimes and bells. And I turned around, and inside, I knew what it was. I said, "Oh shit, I'm dead. They killed me. I'm dead." And I wanted to tell those guys, hey, I'm trying to yell at them, but they can't hear me. I'm floating above them. And I was sucked away in that tunnel. And I emerged in a meadow of energy, a meadow of light. I was just there. And it was beautiful, Evan. I was dead. And I went home. I went home, and I'm going to try not to get too worked up in this memory because this memory does tend to break me down. But I was in this beautiful meadow, and things came to see me. Your pets will come to see you. Your cat, when you pass away, she'll come to see you, Evan. Your dogs, all your friends. And I was there, and it was the most blissful, peaceful thing in the world that you can't even explain it. You go home. And I was there, and someone came, and that someone, he was my uncle, He had passed away a couple years before. My Uncle James, he came and he said what he just appeared, and he was a spirit of light. I call them spirits of light because you have right now, Evan, you're in your body, you're in your physical form, but inside of that body, animating it, is your spirit. And your spirit is the body of your soul. And so this spirit, my uncle came to see me, and I'm in spirit form, and he is made up of light, the most beautiful light you can imagine. And he said, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." And I was like, "I'm here." And he said, "Did you kill yourself?" I said, "No, no, I didn't kill myself. Killing yourself is a bad deal. I want to make sure I communicate that very clearly. If you're going through hell in life, you do not commit suicide. Don't do it. Ride it through. Just ride it through. I have had to ride my life through. This has helped me to do it, Evan." And I said, "No, no, I didn't kill myself." And he's told me I had to come with him. And I had to go to a city, a place, and I had to talk to some people because I wasn't supposed to be there yet. So he took my hand and we left. We left the meadow. It's weird. We just flew. He took my hand and you just fly. It's not like you're stuck in your body and you have to walk around or get in a plane to fly or an airship or something. You just fly. And I would imagine that if I was there for longer, I would learn how to do it myself again. I'd remember how in that realm. But he took my hand and he helped me, and we flew and we went to this city. And I can remember coming up to the city because that whole place we were flying through, it was just beautiful, and it was light and energy, and the mountains are made up of energy, and everything on it is energy and light and color. But when we came to the city emanated so much light, Evan, out of it. You could see it from far away, just shining this light. And we came up to it and we flew down into it, and we landed in front of what I call a government administrative building there. I don't know what else to call it because I feel like a lot of the things we do here, we bring from there.
Mm.
They're not new. And so there are structures in place there like there are here. I don't understand it. All I can tell you is what I remember, but it just seems like the architecture seemed very Greek and very Greek Roman, I would call it, but everything was built out of translucent stone. It wasn't like here where you have a brick building, you're trying and you have windows, but you have curtains, you're trying to keep people out. And the light that was coming from the city, Evan, was coming from all the spirits there, all of the individuals,
Mm.
their light, that shines out of them. And so we're made up of this beautiful spirit and soul that emanates this beautiful energy and beautiful light. And if you were a bad person, you're doling your own energy. You are dimming it. You are doing wrong not only to people around you, but yourself. And you're dimming your own energy and your own light. And so this city was made up of energy and of light, and the buildings were translucent, and it would allow the energy of those people and that light to shine through. Nothing was secret there. That's, I believe, part of why the buildings are translucent. There's nothing to hide. You can't hide anything. It is pure truth. It
Mm.
is just knowledge and truth, and you can't hide anything. And so my uncle, he went in the building and then he was in there a while. I just remember being out in the street, and then he came out and he got me and we went in And at some point, Evan, all these people came. They came to see me, like my animals and my pet friends had come to see me in the meadow. Relatives, friends, people I'd known here on this life, they come to see you because you're there and you've been gone, and they all love you. There's a lot of love there and a lot of forgiveness. And they came to see me, and some of those people, it's really hard to deal with. I know I've talked about it before with other folks, but people come to see you who you've done wrong to. So people I killed, for example, that I was made to kill for the CIA, for the Mormons, for my family. They come to see you. One individual in particular, there's a gal, a young lady I was made to kill in Disneyland. She's playing the role of Alice, and I was made to kill her. And that was beyond horrid. I don't want to talk about that, but she came and she told me she forgave me. And there was the man I talked about earlier that I was made to kill in Reno. He he came and he said he forgave me. He knew that it had. They know it tears you up. You know, when you can't remember these things that happened in your life, they're constantly eating at your subconscious, and it manifests itself through different ways. An example of this would be Britney Spears. That poor girl. She was in the project, and I don't have but one memory I can recall of her, but one, and that was my uncle. And he was going to go abuse her when he dropped me off for the guard detail there in the mountain where the guy crushed my head in with his submachine gun. My uncle dropped me off there. And initially, my uncle was supposed to stay and he was supposed to be there at the ceremony too the whole time. And that made me feel better because I wasn't going to be left alone there. But then he decided he was going to leave because Brittany was being abused down in Bohemian Grove. They were working on her programming and they were going to abuse her down there. And he wanted to get in on that. And he told me that. He said, I'm going to go down and be involved with abusing Brittany. And so he went down and he abused her. You see her a lot in the media doing really weird things.
Mhm.
And it manifests itself, the cry for help and the the searching for answers through different ways because the conscious and subconscious mind aren't coming together right. And so it manifests itself in different ways. But those things tear you apart. So these people, they came to see me and I talked to them for a little while and they're in that place. You don't, there's no secrets, like I said. So I had to be taken to talk to someone there. It was something like what you would call a government official, I suppose, in that realm. And everyone came with me. It wasn't like, oh, just me and my uncle are going in. No, everyone's coming. We all want to see what's going on and gain an understanding of it. And so we all went in there and we talked to this individual for a short time. And in the end, he told me I had to come back. They said, you have to go back. It's not your time. You're not supposed to be here yet. And I didn't want to come back. I was like, no, I'm not going back there. Are you shitting me? I don't want to go back there. It's horrible. But I had no choice. And I was pulled back into consciousness and I was floating above my body. And then I was pulled back into my body as the technicians below me started to fire up the electrical currents back into my body and restarted my heart. That hurt like hell. That hurt like hell having that kicked on again. And so for me, Evan, to answer your question, I'm not afraid to go back there. These people want to try to scare me.
Mm.
They want to try to frighten us. Good luck. I'm not afraid to go back there. Bring it. Send me home. I believe there's a saying for the Japanese samurai, the most powerful samurai that you can face is one who is coming at you with the desire to die.
Mm.
You are not afraid. The fear is gone. Death is nothing but a transition. When I die, I go home again. And one of the things that empowers me is when I go home, Evan, and I see all those people again came to see me, I'm going to tell them I did everything I could, everything, to try to expose this. And I'm not afraid of going back. And so they want to use that fear. People need to stop being afraid. Once you let go of your fear, you gain power. You gain power that is unstoppable because you are not afraid. You are your true self, and you are moving forward with the will of God. I didn't meet God. I won't say I did. I don't know who the individual was I met. I believe I know who it was, but I don't want to say, I don't want to be wrong about that. Everything I've written about in my journaled memories and I've talked about are things I'm positive on. And things I'm not positive on, I don't talk
Mm.
about. And so I won't talk about that. But I'm not afraid to go back. And so people need to let go of their fear. You are a spirit and a soul on a journey in this physical world. And for me, this is like kindergarten being here. These people who seek power and wealth and want control of people, they are spiritually immature. They are fools and they have fooled themselves, Evan, and they have been fooled because this means nothing. This means nothing. When you are here, it's like you're here to learn, you're here to serve, you're here to help others. I watch people and I observe people who live for money, who live for wealth, whose desire they will make choices in their life that will hurt people but bring them gain. No, man, no, that's not the purpose of life. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're dulling your own spiritual light. We need to serve each other. And so I'm okay with going back there, you
Mm.
know, let go of your fear because it makes you powerful.
Yeah.
Because then you're operating on a different level. They want you to operate on the same level they're operating on. And they're operating on such a low vibration of existence that it's pathetic. And so um, don't be concerned about money. Just live to serve everyone around you. Try to be a light in your world. I understand how hard it is. I struggle, you know. I have bad days, I have good days, but I'm trying. I'm trying. And
Mm.
so that's what drives me.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not gonna let them use that fear. They've done things to me, they've tried to kill me, they've sent gunmen in. I've had to deal with that. I have seen the people that are there to kill me. I've had eye contact with them. I'm not afraid of them. If they want to exchange, then we'll have an exchange. But with that said, I do everything humanly possible to avoid such an exchange. Everything. You need to de escalate that situation with every resource you have and try to avoid letting it reach that point. But if it reaches that point, that's the point that it's at. And that's just how it is. And so my grandfather taught me that. That's one of the skills he taught me.
Mm.
And so don't be afraid. They try really hard to use fear and to intimidate. And so just don't let them. Does that answer your question?
No, definitely. And I think that's a powerful perspective. And if anything, it allows you and, I feel a sense of empowerment just listening to those words, and how to show up in the everyday of life, for authentically in search of truth, living with love in our heart and our spirit and being who we are meant to be. I think that's the most powerful thing any of us can do um, in this day and age. And I really really commend you and being able to embody this and actually allow that to be the force that drives you. Because I think having gone what you've gone through, there's a lot of people who would allow that to disempower them, and and they wouldn't. And I think that can be a natural response, and you play into that fear that they are placing onto you, but to take it and to reclaim your power and reclaim your authenticity and understand what all of this is and what life is, um, and have no fear. That's truly it's beautiful and it's powerful, and and I feel like that's a beautiful almost. I know we're closing in on almost 2 hours here, JR. I feel like that's a beautiful closing message almost, to let people reflect on and kind of integrate a lot of what we've talked about here and you sharing your own experience. Um, and, is there any other, I guess if there's any listeners who want to continue to engage and find more, maybe hear more of your story or, find additional resources, where would you send them? What do you think the next steps are to like even, integrate a conversation like this, because I think the integration process, similar to like doing the healing steps, integrating it, that's always as important, if not more so, right? So what would you say
Yep.
those next steps are for anybody listening and how they can continue to go down the path?
Um, if anyone is going through that, they need to keep their head because there's going to be things in their head that they don't understand that are in the background, and they just need to be consciously aware of their thoughts. What are your thoughts and where are they coming from? Because they even have technology out there, it's called voice to skull, where they can put those thoughts and those voices in your head. And I've experienced that, but I'm aware of what it is.
Mm,
It's a really weird thing to go through, but if you are consciously aware, and so try to reach a point of conscious awareness, read Kathy's book, work through your own past. Don't talk to other people about it until you fully understand what you lived through. A lot of folks want to gaslight you. I go through it all the time where people want to gaslight me. Oh, you said this, you did this. No, I didn't. I didn't actually say that. And that's not, don't take it. Understand who you are and what you are about. And and don't worry about what other people think. I if I worried about what other people think, Evan, I would not be here talking to you.
mm,
People tell me, oh, forget about all that. Just close the door on that. That's terrible stuff. Just move on, close the door. Or they'll tell me that's crazy. They tried to make you feel small. They tried to make you feel like you've lost your mind. The information you're providing is not true. For me, it's empowering. I try to take it and use it because they'll say, oh, well, for example, on Twitter, people will say, oh, well, this information is false. Britney Spears wasn't in the any kind of anything until 1998 or whatever. Well, look it up. No, no, I can look it up. She was involved with it clear back in 1993. Look at the Mickey Mouse Club. Look at the commercials she was in. I knew
mm,
who she was. I'm not stupid. You're not stupid. So if you're a survivor, you are special. You are. That's why they targeted you, Evan. That's why. And so do not let them take your power. Take it from them. Try to take what they're doing and use it to your advantage. But don't embrace. It's really difficult for people not to embrace their anger and to hold on to it and to let that destroy them. Don't hold on to it. Anger is a gift. That one guy, I forget, Zach De La Roca or something, the guy on Rage Against the Machine.
Hmm.
I like Rage Against the Machine. They have some good music that they came out with. I enjoy music. And so I try to balance my emotions. If I know that I feel angry, I will listen to angry music, for example, let that anger out, let it pass, and try to move on with the rest of my day. So try to learn how to manage your anger, try to understand who you are, um, work with Kathy's book. I cannot recommend that enough. Kathy's book saved my life, Evan.
Hmm.
Kathy's book is so important that the keys to unlocking your own truth and understand that it is your truth. It's not someone else's. When someone says to me, "Oh, well, I don't believe you," or whatever, I'm like, I just laugh. I'm like, who the hell are you? You think I care?
Right.
I really don't care. You can believe whatever you want. People believe all kinds of things. And I don't want to mock anyone out there in the world. People believe all kinds of things. They can believe whatever they want, but I know my truth. I know what I lived through. And when I begin to learn things about myself, the funny thing about the truth is it can't hide. It
Hmm.
can't hide. Once you start to find it, it can't hide. When I started to remember being in Japan and being involved with that, people in Japan started to die. It's very dangerous. And so it scares the hell out of me, I guess, that way sometimes. I don't want to get other people killed when I remember stuff, but when I started to remember Japan, people start to die. All the members of the cult, the Aum Shinrikyo cult who gassed the subway, those people were involved with Masaru Takumi because Masaru was funding the cult through his mistress, who was her brother, was this guy, Hideki Seijo. And Hideki Seijo, right after I started to remember, Evan, he died. He died of a heart attack. Right after I started to remember in 2018, all the people involved in that cult that were in prison, they put them to death.
Hmm.
People start to die. The truth can't hide. You start to see all these things that start to manifest around that truth, and it can't hide. And so I would say be true to yourself, work on your past, learn to say maybe something's not right. Maybe I don't understand something. A lot of times I witness people's ego and they act like they know everything and they can't believe anything because they already know. Well, guess what? Learn to say maybe. Maybe you don't know everything.
Hmm.
Maybe there's things you need to understand more clearly. Maybe you don't remember something quite. And
Hmm.
so I would say work with Kathy's program that her and Mark have provided. Those people are, a lot of people want to say that Kathy is fake and that Kathy is not genuine. I remember Bird and my grandpa talking about Kathy. I don't care what people say. I remember Bird and my grandpa talking about Kathy and Mark with such venom back in 1993. And they were so pissed at her and pissed at Mark for what they were doing. And so I don't
Hmm.
I don't know what's going on with everyone in the world, but I the things that she and her and Mark were able to put together. So
Hmm. Beautiful.
so
Well, and I was gonna say it's a a beautiful thing to allow the truth to set you free and to show up authentically and be able to articulate, because this is such a dark and heavy subject in a lot of ways. But for me to sit here and feel empowered after hearing your story, I think it speaks to the level of healing and resilience and, being guided in a spiritual sense through your message and your voice and in the way that you share and articulate. Um, so I think that in itself is a beautiful gift, JR, and what you are doing is empowering people through those words. Because here I am sitting feeling very empowered to continue my own path and my own journey, and I know the listeners are going to feel the same way. So I really want to thank you for using your voice, for continuing to show up authentically and to ultimately being who you are. And I think as time goes on, the truth is inevitable to come out even on larger scales. So, and it's tough to speak for the collective, but I think we're moving in the right direction in allowing the truth to sort of guide us here, and you playing a big role in that. So thank you,
Thank you, Evan. I really appreciate the opportunity and the platform to speak.
absolutely,
So I really
absolutely.
appreciate that. Yeah, something I would like you to do if you could before you start this video for folks is put a warning up
Hmm.
because I wouldn't want to trigger anyone unintentionally. If they're not ready for it, then that could be harmful.
Yep.
And so if you could just do that,
Yeah,
that
definitely. And I always do a like a pre-recorded intro, if you will, before. So I'll put that up
okay.
right in the introduction and, let people know of this is the type of, a trigger warning essentially, and give people a heads up that because it is a heavy subject. And, I think it for a lot of people, if they're not ready to digest it, the conversation will be there when they're ready for it. But, you know, and those who tune in, I think maybe they're meant to and ready to hear it. And I think that's it's an empowering thing when you're ready to digest the truth and dive into it. So I'm very grateful to be able to have you on. And I'd love to in the future plan another conversation and continue to dive in, because I'm sure as time goes on, we continue to unpack and explore in new ways. So it feels like one of those subjects that we can kind of just keep exploring and see where we go. So I'd love to circle back and plan for another conversation in the near future.
Yeah, yeah, that would be awesome. For me, I feel like we didn't cover very much.
All right. Well, and that's the thing. I feel like
There's,
it's we've been on 2 hours, and it feels like we could keep going for hours and hours on end. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, which
So it
is
was good to talk to you, Evan. I really appreciate it.
absolutely. And it was great to talk to you as well. And I'll have this up within the next week or two. And once I do, I'll send you an email with the link and everything. And um, but yeah, and I'm already looking forward to the next conversation. That's when you know it was a good one, because we're already planning out a second one. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you, Evan. I
all right,
appreciate it.
all right, thank you, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Okay.
All right, bye. Special thank you to JR for coming on the fifth dimension. Apologize, I'm still a little occupied with Miss Aurora here. She is scratching at me, clawing at me, doing things that kittens do. I'm going to attempt to wrangle this kitten, probably unsuccessfully. Um, but special thank you to JR for coming on. I really enjoyed being able to hear his story, and I feel like I'm leaving this episode with a sense of empowerment, as I mentioned, commitment to my own path, my own truth, and ultimately uncovering who it is that we are. I think is what's most important, and uncovering what lives beneath the surface. We all have experiences, we all have traumas, we all have a past, we all have been shaped one way or another. Um, by certain experiences. What is Aurora doing? She's calling at the cords. This is why I can't have a kitten in a podcast studio. It just starts ripping up the equipment. Get out of here. Ripping up my skin too. I got cuts and bruises all over my hands. Oh, abuse. Abuse via kitten. But yeah. Move forward with empowerment. Do not be afraid. No need to be in fear, and even when we're dealing with heavy subjects like this, because ultimately, when we do die, we go back home, as JR was talking about. And I think that was truly a powerful way to end this episode. So I'd encourage you guys to check out his work, check out Kathy O'Brien's book. As he mentioned, the links for all that is in the episode show notes below. Be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you're on. You also subscribe on Substack. You can also work with me one-on-one if you're called to do so. All the links are in the episode show notes below. And be sure to subscribe because there's more great interviews coming your way in the very near future. That's going to wrap up this episode. I will see you all next time. So long.